Welcome to Narrative Lab.
Today, we are stepping into a laboratory where the experiment has gone, well, terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Or maybe, just maybe, where the experiment is the only thing that's real.
We are cracking open a book that feels less like a novel and more like, I don't know, a radioactive artifact, something smuggled across a border that just shouldn't exist. We're talking about Philip K. Dick's Hugo Award-winning masterpiece, The Man in the High Castle.
He has a text that it absolutely earns its reputation. And I think it's important to say right up front, this is technically science fiction, sure, or alternate history.
Right.
But those labels almost do it a disservice. Dick isn't just playing a game of Risk with World War II. He's not just moving armies around on a map to see what would happen.
No, absolutely not. I think most people know the elevator pitch, or maybe they've seen the TV show, which is really its own separate beast entirely.
A very different animal.
The pitch is simple. It's 1962, but the Allies lost the war. The Nazis and the Japanese Empire, they run the world. But when you actually sit down and read the book, you realize the setting, the swastikas in Times Square, a Japanese colony in San Francisco, that's just the wallpaper.
Correct. It's the wallpaper for something much more psychological, much deeper.
It's a book about fake antiques. It's about fake identities, and honestly, it feels like it's about fake realities. It's just a hall of mirrors.
Precisely. And that's why the mission of this deep dive isn't just to recap the plot. If you want a plot summary, you can find that anywhere.
Right. Go read Wikipedia.
We want to deconstruct the machinery that Dick built. We're going to look at the psychology of fascism through the lens of, say, Erich Fromm. We'll look at the concept of bad faith through Jean-Paul Sartre.
The nature of simulacra, Baudrillard.
Absolutely. And the nature of reality itself, all filtered through the I Ching.
And we are going to talk about Zippo lighters. I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at a Zippo lighter the same way again.
I think that's a safe bet.
But before we get to the philosophy of lighters, we have to ground ourselves in this world. It's 1962. But it is not the Camelot era of Kennedy. There is no Beatles. There's no civil rights movement.
No, it's a world gripped by a very specific texture of despair. And I think that's what Dick captures so well. It isn't just, oh, the evil people are in charge. It's the banality of it.
The quiet dread.
The United States as a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Slavery is legal again in parts of the world, and the culture is obsessed almost pathologically with the past.
Okay, so to understand how we got to this nightmare version of 1962, we have to talk about the John Bar hinge.
Yes.
That sounds like a piece of hardware you'd buy at Home Depot. I need a John Bar hinge for my door.
It's a literary term, right?
It is. It comes out of 1930s science fiction criticism, specifically around time travel stories. It refers to that singular moment where history just snaps.
The pivot point. The pivot point where the timeline diverges. In our timeline, the quote-unquote real one, on February 15th, 1933, an unemployed bricklayer and anarchist named Giuseppe Zangara. He tried to assassinate President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt in Miami.
Right, and in our world, he missed. He hit Anton Cermak, the mayor of Chicago, instead. FDR went on to lead the country through the Depression, through the war.
But in Dick's novel, Zangara doesn't miss.
He hits the target.
FDR is dead before he even takes the oath of office.
Yeah.
And this, right here, is where Dick shows us just how fragile history is. Because without FDR, there's no New Deal.
The Great Depression doesn't end.
It deepens. It gets worse. It creates this vacuum of leadership. The United States remains crippled economically, and crucially, it embraces this strict policy of non-interventionism.
The Garner administration, then the Bricker administration, they just turn inward. They pull up the drawbridge.
Exactly. So when the war starts in Europe, America stays home. They're too weak, they're too broken, too isolationist to fight. And this lets the Nazis just overrun Europe and the Soviet Union without any U.S. interference.
And it lets Imperial Japan dominate the entire Pacific.
And eventually they come for America.
The war ends when?
By 1947, the Allies have surrendered. The U.S. military is completely dismantled. And that brings us to the map of 1962. It's a partition nightmare.
So walk us through this map, because the geography really dictates the psychology of every single character.
Okay, so on the West Coast, you have the Pacific States of America, the PSA. This is California, Oregon, Washington. It isn't technically part of Japan, but it's a puppet state.
So occupied territory.
It's under martial law, military occupation by Imperial Japan. Life is ordered, it's hierarchical, and it's tense.
And then on the East Coast.
The East Coast, and this is crucial, the South, is the United States, but in name only. It's a satellite state, a puppet of the German Reich. It's run by a collaborationist government that answers directly to Berlin. The swastika flies over New York City.
And what's in the middle?
In between them, along the Rocky Mountains, is the Rocky Mountain States, the RMS. It's a neutral buffer zone,
A no man's land.
basically. It's poor, it's lawless, and it's where refugees, political dissidents, and people just trying to disappear tend to hide. It's the only place with a semblance of the old American freedom, but it's a freedom born of neglect, not of rights.
The whole atmosphere Dick describes is so stifling, so gray. But what's weird, and what I found really unsettling when I first read it, is that technologically this world is actually, well, it's ahead of ours in 1962.
In some ways, yes. And this is a very deliberate choice on Dick's part. He wants to show that fascism is efficient. The Nazis have engineered these terrifying marvels.
Like what?
They have Lufthansa rockets that can fly from Europe to California in 45 minutes. They've drained the entire Mediterranean Sea, they call it Project Farmland, to create arable land.
Which is actually based on a real theoretical engineering proposal from the 1920s called Atlantropa.
It is a German architect's fever dream.
Yeah.
And in the book, they've actually done it. They're colonizing the moon, Mars, and Venus.
It sounds like a golden age of pulp sci-fi. Rocket ships and terraforming planets.
Except it's built on a foundation of absolute horror. And that is the contrast Dick wants us to feel. You have these incredible rockets and space colonies, but back on Earth, the final solution didn't stop in 1945.
No.
It expanded.
Yeah.
Africa is described in the book as a huge, empty ruin.
That phrase just, it's stuck with me. A huge empty ruin. It's so chilling.
It implies a genocide on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. That the Nazis essentially wiped out the population of an entire continent. They did it to test their science, to clear room for their so-called superior race. It is pure monstrosity masquerading as progress.
And that really sets the stakes for the psychological state of the characters. You aren't just living in a dictatorship. You're living in a world where moral darkness has won completely. God, or whatever force creates justice, has just left the building.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that brings us to the people living in this nightmare. One of the most fascinating and frankly most pathetic characters to me is Robert Childan.
Childan is our entry point into the Pacific States. He owns a little shop called American Artistic Handcrafts in San Francisco.
Which sounds very fancy, but let's call a spade a spade. He's basically selling nostalgia to the conquerors.
He is. His entire clientele is wealthy Japanese officials and businessmen who've developed this fetish for pre-war American culture. They collect Mickey Mouse watches, Civil War revolvers, old comic books.
Like Buffalo Bill posters?
Exactly. They view these items as carrying the spirit of a dead civilization.
It's like how people in our world might collect Roman coins or, indigenous artifacts. It's the conqueror fetishizing the culture of the conquered.
That's it, exactly. And Childan is the guy brokering these deals. But the way he acts, you used the word pathetic earlier, and it just fits perfectly. He is so obsequious, he bows, he scrapes, he changes his speech patterns to sound like a bad translation of Japanese.
It's cringeworthy to read, but is it just survival? I mean, if he doesn't bow and scrape, does he get shot?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And this is where we have to bring in Jean-Paul Sartre. Childan is a perfect case study for Sartre's concept of bad faith.
Okay, let's unpack that. Bad faith. It sounds like a legal term, or maybe something religious. What does Sartre actually mean by it?
Sartre defines bad faith as a form of self-deception. It's when a human being lies to themselves to avoid the crushing responsibility of their own freedom.
Lying to yourself to avoid being free.
Yes. You adopt a role that's imposed on you by society or by others, and you pretend you have no choice but to play that role. You turn yourself into an object.
Can you give me a real-world example?
Sartre's most famous example is the waiter in a cafe. The waiter who is moving just a little too quickly, whose gestures are a little too precise, who is performing the dance of being a waiter. He's trying to be a waiter in the same way that a rock is a rock.
But he isn't a rock.
He isn't a rock. He's a free human being who is choosing to act like a waiter. If he denies that choice, if he says, I have to do this, this is all I am, that is bad faith.
So Childan isn't just a shopkeeper. He's playing the role of the conquered inferior.
He's playing it to the hilt. And it's internal. That's the key. Childan suffers from this deeply internalized racism. He resents the Japanese. In his internal monologue, he refers to their yellowness. He hates them. He thinks they're grotesque.
But at the same time,
he desperately craves their approval. He mimics their speech. He adopts their aesthetic standards. He has completely surrendered his authentic identity to fit the mold he thinks they want him to fill.
So he's trapped. He's in a cycle of servitude. He hates his masters, but he hates himself more for needing their approval.
Yes, He believes he's determined by his circumstances. I am a white man in a Japanese world, therefore I must be a worm, Sartre would say. No, Robert, you are choosing to be a worm because it is safer than choosing to be a man.
That is brutal, but it makes perfect sense. He's hiding from the terror of having to define himself in a world that already hates him.
And this lack of authenticity in Childan perfectly mirrors the lack of authenticity in the objects he sells. And this is where we get to the historicity racket.
The Zippo Lighter. This is one of my favorite scenes in the book because it's just two guys talking in an apartment, but it completely destroys the entire concept of value.
It's the scene with Wyndham Matson. He's an industrialist, a collaborator, really. He runs a factory that makes metal goods, and he's entertaining a young woman in his apartment, and he decides to explain the scam of the antique business to her. So he takes out 2 Zippo lighters.
And he says, look at these. One of them was in FDR's pocket when he was assassinated in this timeline. The other one is just a generic lighter from the drugstore. And they look identical. Physically, chemically, they are the exact same object.
Exactly. If you swap them, no microscope on Earth could tell you which is which. But one is worth a fortune, maybe thousands of dollars in this economy, and the other's worth $1. Why?
Because of the provenance, a
This-
paper trail, the little certificate that says this was FDR's.
And Wyndham Matson argues that historicity, this magical quality that the Japanese collectors pay millions for, doesn't exist in the object itself. It can't be measured. It has no mass, no atomic weight. It exists entirely in the mind of the observer, or more accurately, in the document of authenticity,
It's a shared hallucination.
a shared, very profitable hallucination.
This feels like it connects directly to Jean Baudrillard. You mentioned him in the intro.
It connects perfectly to his idea of the simulacrum. Baudrillard argues that in a postmodern world, the fake becomes indistinguishable from the real, to the point where the distinction just loses all meaning.
A copy without an original?
Or a signifier that has completely detached from the signified. In this case, the signifier is the paper certificate. That piece of paper is the value. The object itself, the lighter, is just a vessel. It's a prop. The so-called authentic object is a simulacrum, a sign completely severed from reality.
So the Japanese are buying ghosts. They're buying a story printed on a piece of paper, which happens to be attached to a piece of junk metal.
And the ultimate irony is that the factories producing the fakes are often the same ones that produce the real goods in the first place. And this leads us to the production side of this whole economy. We meet Frank.
Frank is such a tragic figure, at least at the start. He's basically the counterpart to Childan, but instead of selling the junk, he's the one who makes it.
And he has a secret,
Perfect.
a big one. His real name isn't Frank, it's Fink. He's Jewish. In the Pacific states, Jews are technically allowed to live, but they're second-class citizens, and they're always at risk of being deported to the German Reich.
Which means death.
Instant death.
Yeah.
So Frank is living a fake life. He has a fake name. He has a fake nose. He literally had surgery to change his appearance so he wouldn't look stereotypically Jewish. And he works for Wyndham Matson making fake antiques.
He's crafting counterfeit Colt .44s. He's taking new metal, treating it with chemicals to make it look old, banging it up with a hammer to give it history.
He is literally manufacturing the historicity that his oppressors fetishize. The Japanese value this deep spiritual connection to the past, but the entire market is flooded with lies produced by the very people they've enslaved.
It's a closed loop of inauthenticity. It's fake people living fake lives, selling fake history to people who are living in a fake victory.
Beautifully put. It is a closed loop, which is why the next movement in the book is so incredibly important, the counter movement. Frank decides to break that loop.
He gets fired, or he quits, it's a bit of both, and he teams up with a buddy, Ed McCarthy. And they decide to start their own business, Ed Frank Jewelry. But they make a very specific, very important decision. They aren't going to make fake Civil War belt buckles anymore.
No, they do something dangerous. They create something new.
Genuinely new.
They make abstract modern jewelry. Silver loops, whorls, amorphous shapes. These pieces don't reference the past. They don't have any historicity. They aren't trying to trick anyone.
They are just themselves. They are what they are.
And this brings us to the concept of woo. There's a character named Paul Kasora, a young, sophisticated Japanese man. And Childan, our sycophantic shopkeeper, tries to sell this new jewelry to him, hoping to impress him with something native and authentic.
And Kasura looks at this strange, blobby silver pin. He holds it, he studies it, and he doesn't see history. He sees something else entirely.
He says the piece possesses woo.
Define that for us, because it's not just cool or
Well,
pretty.
Woo is a Taoist concept. It's difficult to translate directly, but in this context, it implies a kind of spiritual balance or wisdom or enlightenment.
Mm.
Casora says the object has made peace with the universe.
Wow.
It isn't striving. It isn't pretending. It isn't a fake antique trying to be a real antique. It is an authentic expression of the artist's soul. It has an inner truth.
That is such a heavy contrast to the Zippo lighter. The lighter needs a piece of paper to tell you it's real. The jewelry's real because it has woo. It has an internal authenticity.
And this leads to the climax of Robert Childan's entire arc. And I have to say, for a character as unlikable as Childan is for most of the book, this moment makes me cheer every single time.
It's his redemption. A small one, but it's there.
Casora, maybe he's testing Childan, maybe not, but he suggests that this jewelry could be a big hit. But he suggests they mass produce it. He says, take this mold, make 10,000 of them, sell them as cheap good luck charms to the superstitious masses in South America and Asia.
It's a great business opportunity. It would make Childan rich. And the old Childan, the one living in bad faith, would have jumped at that. He would have been bowing and saying, yes, sir, brilliant idea, sir.
But he doesn't. For the first time, Childan feels this flash of genuine anger. Not fear, not resentment, real hot anger. And he refuses. He tells Casora that these are works of art made by American artists, and he will not degrade them into trinkets.
He actually stands up for himself, and not just for himself, but for Frank and Ed, even though he barely knows them.
He defends the dignity of the creators. And in the philosophy of Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher who writes about the politics of recognition, this is the demand for recognition. Childan moves from being the servile shopkeeper to an authentic individual. He realizes that by defending the woo in the jewelry, he is defending his own humanity.
He stops being the waiter.
He starts being a man.
It's a small victory. I mean, he's still just a shopkeeper in an occupied city, but internally, the chains are broken.
Exactly. But while Childan is finding himself, we have other characters who are losing themselves. We need to talk about the Rocky Mountain States and the road trip from hell.
Yes, the storyline with Juliana Frank, who is Frank's ex-wife, and this mysterious truck driver, Joe Cinadella.
Juliana's cool. She's one of the few characters who feels really modern to us. She lives in that neutral zone. She's independent. She teaches judo. And she meets Joe, who claims to be this Italian truck driver, a veteran of the war on the Axis side.
And they start a relationship, and it's volatile. They decide to go on a road trip to find the author of Banned Book. We'll get to the book in a minute. But the dynamic between them is just so unsettling.
It's a study in the psychology of fascism.
Joe is. He's intense. He talks a lot about how the Nazis saved Europe from chaos and communism. He has this very dark, cynical worldview. He thinks abstract art is degenerate. He thinks pity is a weakness.
He represents what the psychologist Erich Fromm called masochistic submission in his incredible book, Escape from Freedom.
Escape from Freedom. That's a great title.
Fromm was writing in 1941, trying to figure out why Germany, a cultured, educated, modern nation, fell for Hitler. And he argued that the deep appeal of fascism is that it removes the burden of individual choice.
The fear of freedom.
Exactly. To be free is terrifying. If you're free, you're alone. You have to make choices, and you have to be responsible for the outcomes of those choices. Joe believes that nature is violence, and that democracy is weak because it's messy and inefficient. He believes the only way to survive is to submit to a strong leader, to a totalizing system.
He wants to be a cog in the machine.
Because being a cog is safer than being a free human being. He wants to be dissolved into the collective power of the Reich.
And the twist, of course, confirms all of this. Joe isn't an Italian truck driver at all.
No. He's a Swiss assassin.
A Swiss assassin.
He's an undercover agent for the Nazi intelligence service. He's been sent to kill the author, Hawthorne Abenson. He has literally erased his own identity, his nationality, his hair color, his profession, to become a tool of the state.
But he runs into Juliana, and Juliana is a searcher for truth. She's open-minded, she asks questions, and physically she is very capable. She teaches judo, she understands balance, another form of woo, right?
Right. The climax of their story is just brutal. They're in a hotel room in Denver. She's finally figured out who he really is. And Joe, he almost seems to want her to kill him. He enters this weird, depressive, nihilistic state.
It's like his programming just breaks down for a minute.
But Juliana doesn't submit. She doesn't play the victim. She fights back. She cuts his throat with a razor blade.
It's a shocking act of violence. I remember reading it for the first time and thinking, whoa, she actually did it.
It is shocking. But philosophically, it is the ultimate rejection of Fromm's masochistic submission. She refuses to let the fascist machine just roll over her. She chooses action. She chooses to protect the truth, the author, Rather than submit to the lie, she asserts her own existence.
And speaking of the truth and the author, we absolutely have to talk about the book within the book. The grasshopper lies heavy.
Yes, this is the metafictional heart of the entire novel. In this world where the Axis won, there is this popular underground novel being passed around called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, and it depicts a world where the Allies won World War II.
It's an alternate history inside an alternate history.
A mise en abîme, to use a literary term. A mirror reflecting a mirror. But here is the crucial detail that so many casual readers miss. The history in The Grasshopper Lies Heavy is not our history.
Right. I think people just assume it's a window into our real world, the reader's world, but it's not.
No. In Grasshopper, FDR isn't president for 12 years. Rexford Tugwell succeeds him. The British Empire doesn't collapse, it becomes a superpower again. And eventually, the US and the UK enter a Cold War against each other.
So it's a third reality. You've got the High Castle reality where the Axis wins, our reality where the Allies win and we have a USSR Cold War, and the Grasshopper reality where the Allies win and there's a US-UK Cold War.
Which is just brilliant because it prevents the book from being a simple wish fulfillment for the characters. It suggests that reality itself is fluid. There are infinite variations. It's not a binary choice.
And the reactions to this book tell you everything you need to know about the different factions. The Nazis ban it, obviously.
Of course. Because fascism cannot tolerate a competing narrative. The truth, or even a fictional truth, is a virus to them. They have to control the past to control the future.
But the Japanese allow it.
They treat it with curiosity, with a kind of detached tolerance. It shows the cultural difference Dick establishes between the two conquering powers. The Japanese in the book are brutal conquerors, yes, but they still value aesthetics and ideas in a way the Nazis, who are depicted as these spiritual voids, just do not.
And the Americans, the conquered people, they read it as a patriotic duty. It gives them a glimpse of a world where they aren't losers, it's their secret resistance.
But who wrote it? That's the mystery. Hawthorne Ebenson, the man in the high castle. Legend says he lives in this massive fortress with armed guards and dogs to protect himself from Nazi assassins.
But when Juliana finally gets there, after she kills Joe, she finds, what, a normal house?
Just a suburban house in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The high castle is a myth. Another fake. Another simulacrum. Abinson is just a guy in a cardigan. But he reveals something incredible to her. He didn't write the book.
The Oracle wrote it.
The I Ching. The ancient Chinese book of changes.
And we see the I Ching used throughout the entire novel. Characters like the Japanese official Tagomi and Frank Frink. They throw coins or yarrow stalks to make big decisions. It's almost like a character in itself.
It is. The I Ching operates on the principle of synchronicity. The Jungian idea that there are no coincidences, and that the random fall of coins can reveal the underlying pattern of the moment, the Tao.
It sounds superstitious to our modern ears. I'm going to flip a coin to decide my business strategy.
But in the book, it works. It provides genuine wisdom. And here's the kicker, the part that just makes your brain fold in on itself. Philip K. Dick himself used the I Ching to write The Man in the High Castle.
Wait, really? For real?
Yes.
Yeah.
He said so in interviews. He would ask the coins, what should this character do, or what happens next in the plot, and he would write whatever result the oracle gave him. So the plot of the book was determined by the exact same oracle that the characters in the book are using to guide their lives.
That is so meta. So Dick used the I Ching to write a book about a guy who used the I Ching to write a book.
And that layering, that self-reference, it leads to the most mind-bending moment in the entire story, the experience of Mr. Tagomi.
Let's talk about Tagomi. He's a high-ranking Japanese trade official in San Francisco. He's a good man, or he tries to be, but he gets dragged into the violence. He has to use an antique revolver, one of the fakes, or maybe a real one, it's ambiguous, to kill some Nazi thugs who are trying to assassinate a defector.
And the violence breaks him. He's a Buddhist. Taking a life destroys his inner peace, his spiritual balance. He is sickened. He goes to a park to meditate, and he's holding a piece of Frank's jewelry, that abstract silver pin that has woo.
And he focuses on it. He stares into the silver squiggles.
And the world shifts. The woo in the object acts as a kind of bridge. Tagomi looks up, and the world has changed. The Japanese banners on the buildings are gone. He sees the Embarcadero Freeway.
Which existed in our world, or it did, before the earthquake. But it never existed in his world because San Francisco is a Japanese colony and developed differently.
He wanders into a diner, and the white people there, they don't bow to him. They don't defer to him. They look at him like he's just a guy, a tourist. He hears them talking, and they aren't speaking the Pidgin English of the occupied zone. They're just speaking American English.
He has been transported into our reality, or a reality very, very close to ours.
That scene gives me chills every time I read it, because it implies that the high castle reality, the one we spent the whole book fearing, is fragile. It's not solid. It's permeable.
It implies that reality is subjective. The Wu object was so authentic, so unconnected to the fake history of his world, that it pierced the veil. It shows that the totalitarian nightmare is just one timeline, one bad dream that you can potentially wake up from.
It's Plato's cave. Dagommi stepped out of the cave for just a moment and saw the sun. And it terrified him. He actually rushes back to his own reality because the truth was too alien, too overwhelming.
So when Juliana finally confronts Abenson at the end, and she asks the big question, why did the I Ching write "the grasshopper lies heavy"?
She throws the coins one last time. She puts the question to the oracle directly. And the oracle gives her hexagram 61, Chung Fu.
Which means inner truth.
And Juliana interprets this immediately. She looks right at the author and she says, it means it's true.
The book is true. The grasshopper lies heavy. The world where the Allies won is the truth.
Which creates a paradox that breaks the fourth wall and might just break the listener's brain. If the book about the Allies winning is true, with the capital T, then the characters Juliana, Abenson, Dagommi, they're living in a false reality.
They're living in a fiction.
They're realizing they're characters in a book.
Or, to put it more philosophically, they're realizing that their entire universe is a mistake, an aberration, a fake timeline that shouldn't exist. The inner truth of the cosmos is that fascism is a distortion of the natural order. It is an inauthentic state of being. The universe itself rejects it.
That is, wow. It takes the whole concept of fake antiques and just elevates it to fake universe.
Exactly. The fakes in the antique shop, the fake historical artifacts, the fake Zippo, and the fake timeline, they are all symptoms of the exact same disease. The world is out of balance. It lacks Wu.
So if their world is fake, where does that leave the individual? Because if I found out my universe was a mistake, I think I'd just give up.
But Juliana doesn't, and neither does Frank. And that is the ultimate message of the book. Despite the crushing weight of the Nazis or the Imperial Japanese or the bad faith of the market, the inner truth is found in the individual.
It's found in Frank making his jewelry.
It's found in Childan refusing to sell out his own people's art.
It's found in Juliana risking her life to find the author, to find the source of truth.
Dick is saying that in a world of simulacra, of propaganda, of overwhelming systemic lies, the only place authenticity can truly exist is inside you. You have to define it. You have to forge it, like Frank forged that silver. You cannot buy authenticity from a dealer. You have to make it yourself.
That's a really hopeful message for such a dark, bleak book. It's
Yeah.
basically saying the world might be fake, but you don't have to be.
Precisely. And I think there's one final provocative thought to leave our listeners with.
Lay it on us.
If the characters in The Man in the High Castle discovered their reality was fake by consulting a book and an oracle, what does that say about our reality?
Oh, don't do this to me.
No, think about it. We read this book and we say, oh, thank goodness we live in the real world where the Allies won. We pat ourselves on the back. But Dick is constantly playing with the idea that we are just as trapped in simulacra as they are. We're surrounded by fake news, by commodified history, by curated identities on social media.
We have our own Robert Childans. We have our own Wyndham Absons selling us stories instead of products.
So the question remains, is our world Cheng Fu? Is it inner truth? Or are we just characters in another one of Philip K. Dick's alternate timelines, waiting for someone to cast the coins and wake us all up?
That is terrifying and wonderful.
That is Philip K. Dick.
Well, on that existential cliffhanger, I think we'll have to wrap up. Thank you for entering the narrative lab with us.
Keep seeking the truth.
See you in the next reality.